I knew something was off the moment HR asked if I had a minute to chat. No calendar invite. No prep document. Just a smile tight enough to snap dental floss. I walked into conference room B expecting balloons, or at least a congratulations. After 14 years of missed birthdays, holiday double shifts, and fixing procurement nightmares on Christmas Eve, I truly believed I was being promoted. Instead, there sat Nathan Hallberg in his fitted charcoal suit, pretending like he hadn't just pissed on my career. He slid the envelope across the table like it was a wedding invite and said, "We're restructuring. Today's your last day." No handshake, no eye contact, just corporate manslaughter in slow motion. I stared at him for maybe 2 seconds too long. Not angry, numb. My brain refused to translate the moment into English. I looked at the envelope, then back at Nathan, and I swear, if my soul had vocal cords, it would have just laughed. I didn't say a word, didn't cry, didn't rage, just nodded once the way you do when someone tells you your dog ran away and you know damn well it didn't run. It was taken. I walked out with one cardboard box, my stapler, a photo of my dad, and a mug that said, "Suck one supply chain slayer." The elevator ride down felt like freefall. 14 years, and it all fit in one goddamn box. And hey, while you're here, listening to this mess unfold, do me a solid. Tap the like button and hit subscribe. Yeah, you. It helps more than you know. 97% of people don't, and honestly, it means the world to the team putting this together. Back to that elevator. I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall and barely recognized the woman looking back. The navy blazer I'd saved for big meetings suddenly felt like a costume. My name badge, still clipped on, mocked me. Elise Morrow, Senior Ops Strategist. Not anymore. I walked out into the October air, the cold biting harder than usual, and sat in my car for 20 minutes. No radio, no calls, just silence and the hum of betrayal filling my ears. I didn't even turn the key. Just sat there, watching as Calburn's glass doors slid open for the next unsuspecting cog. Nathan thought he'd just let go of some middle-tier logistics drone, another number in the system. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, is that I wasn't just Elise Morrow, back-end ops expert. I was also the silent majority owner of the very building they worked in. My father, God rest his stubborn, brilliant soul, had left me the controlling shares in a quiet real estate trust that owned a dozen commercial properties, including Calburn's flagship hub. I'd kept it quiet all these years, not out of modesty, but because I never needed to use it. Until now. You don't fire someone like me without consequences. I didn't shout it from the rooftop or throw a tantrum in the lobby. That's not my style. I took my box, drove home, pulled out my father's old manila folder marked Calburn Lease, and laid it on the kitchen table. The paper smelled like dust and old revenge. And as I flipped through the documents, highlighting clause after clause about tenant violations, renewal terms, and breach conditions, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. They thought they'd discarded a pawn, but they'd just pissed off the queen who built the board. My name is Elise Morrow, and I don't believe in coincidences, only setups. So when Nathan Hallberg sent me packing, with that smug little nod, he didn't realize he'd just triggered a setup 20 years in the making. Most people at Calburn knew me as the quiet workhorse who could reverse engineer an inventory crisis blindfolded. I kept my head down, made no waves, never once corrected someone when they called me just ops. Let them believe what they needed to feel superior. But beneath that low ponytail and task lists color-coded to hell, I held something they didn't. Blood ties to the dirt under their shoes. My father, William Morrow, wasn't flashy. He didn't wear cufflinks or brag about golf games with VPs. He bought property, cheap, quietly. Then he put it in a trust. And when he passed, he left me majority control. At the time, I was just out of college and grieving. I didn't think much of it. The paperwork lived in a black fireproof box beneath a pile of holiday decor in my attic. But I never sold, never touched a square foot of it. One of those properties, Calburn's main distribution hub, wrapped up in a multi-decade lease with a few backdoor clauses my father insisted stay in. I didn't drive straight home that day. I needed to clear my head. So I stopped at Donnelly Park, sat on the same bench Dad used to eat his turkey sandwiches on, and just let the silence sink in. The wind smelled like burnt leaves and resentment. I watched people rush to lunch meetings and sales calls, completely unaware that their lives were ticking time bombs, just like mine had been. But I wasn't destroyed. I was recalibrating. When I finally made it back to the house, I didn't even take off my shoes. I went straight for the attic and hauled out the box. It was heavier than I remembered. Dusty. Smelled like old carpet and forgotten justice. Inside, everything was intact. Notarized deeds, trust transfer documents, lease agreements, and a yellowed folder labeled in my father's scrawl, Calburn, active. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee, sat at my kitchen table with those papers fanned out like tarot cards, and ran my finger along a line I hadn't looked at in over a decade. Landlord reserves right to evaluate tenant compliance in the event of operational redundancy. My lip curled. Redundancy. That was the word Nathan used. The irony had me chuckling like I'd just read the best goddamn punchline of my life. They didn't fire a staff member. They terminated their compliance officer's boss, their leaseholder, their landlord. I had been signing off on the maintenance budgets and zoning audits under a trustee alias for years. I knew every detail about that facility, from the outdated HVAC system to the improperly shelved fireproof storage room. And now, I knew how to squeeze them where it would hurt most. Legally, quietly, surgically. That night, I didn't cry, didn't rage. I made a checklist, titled it Eviction Phase 1. First bullet point, review financial vulnerability. Second, submit independent site audit under Shell Consultancy. Third, confirm board turnover schedule. I leaned back, staring at my father's signature on the trust deed. Time to clean house, Dad, I whispered. And I swear to God, the furnace kicked on like he'd nodded from wherever he was. It didn't take long. The rot always rises to the surface once you know where to press. Within 72 hours of being shown the door, I had my hooks back into Calburn, this time from the outside. One polite call to a colleague who owed me a favor, one late-night scroll through public filings, and one well-placed request for procurement data from a third-party vendor who never updated their email security. And I had enough dirt to realize the truth. Calburn was hemorrhaging, and not the kind of slow bleed you cauterize. I'm talking severed artery, gushing cash into legacy tech contracts, 6-figure expense reports for client engagement dinners, and an executive tier fattened up like foie gras with bonuses stacked on metrics they fabricated in Excel. The real kicker? They were already courting external consultants to help streamline operations. Oh, the irony. You fire your best strategist and then beg strangers to solve the exact mess she warned you about a dozen times. I should have been furious. Instead, I was surgical. I registered a shell company, Indigo Merge Limited, under a Delaware entity with a dummy email and a website that looked just sleek enough to pass scrutiny. Then I drafted a proposal so clean, so metric-driven and modern, it made the rest of the bids look like scribbles on napkins. Full AI integration, predictive routing, cost redundancy mapping. I knew exactly what they needed because I used to be the one fixing it from the inside. The only difference now? I was selling the fix back to them at a premium and anonymously. But that was only the first layer. While Indigo Merge worked its way into the board's shortlist, I submitted a separate application to join Calburn's temp operations team. A contractor rotation? Disposable labor? No one pays attention to the clipboard ghosts. I filled out the form under my mother's maiden name, Elaine Hawthorne, and listed my former positions at defunct subsidiaries. I even dumbed down my resume to look like someone who got halfway through a community college logistics certificate and bounced between warehouse gigs. When the badge arrived, I stared at it for a full minute. E. Hawthorne, Temp Ops. Printed in faded ink. No photo. Lanyard thin enough to snap if I breathed wrong. I hadn't worn a badge that low since my first year on the job, back when I thought the company's break room pizza was an act of corporate love. The morning I re-entered the building, no one looked twice. Security waved me through with the dead-eyed boredom of people trained not to ask questions. Inside, nothing had changed. Same flickering lights above the vending machines. Same recycled air? Same posters about efficiency through empathy peeling off the walls. I clocked in with a temp card, filed into the ops bullpen, and sat at a desk with a broken drawer and a monitor from 2011. Beautiful. For the next few days, I was invisible by design. I made copies. I fetched data entry logs. I ran inventory counts like a good little nobody. I kept my head down and my ears wide open. Everyone gossiped around me like I was furniture. They didn't know they were feeding the wolf through the door. Back at home, I kept tabs on Indigo Merge's progress. The board liked the bid. I could tell by the meeting notes I still had remote access to through a forgotten third-party calendar sync. The chairman flagged our proposal twice. One board member forwarded it to their private consultant with a note. Why didn't we think of this? Because you fired the one person who could have built it for free. I pinned my own badge on the corkboard above my desk next to the old one they took from me. E. Hawthorne. E. Morrow. 2 lives. 1 purpose. And the house cleaning had just begun. No one looked twice. That was the beauty of it. I was wallpaper now, disposable. Ellie, they called me, short for Elaine, I suppose, though no one asked. A name you forget between meetings. I'd go entire mornings without anyone acknowledging I existed, unless they needed staples, toner, or a warm body to sit in a supply room while a shipment was logged. I was the ghost in the machine. They passed me in the halls, with glazed eyes and half-smiles. The same people I used to train now tossed me their empty coffee cups like I was born to rinse and repeat. Nathan passed my desk every morning like clockwork, his gait somewhere between a frat boy and a stock photo CEO. "Morning, kiddo?" He'd grin, never pausing long enough to see the look on my face. Once, he winked. I nearly bit through my tongue. I could feel my own blood pressure clawing at my temples like it was trying to dig out. But I said nothing. I nodded like a good little ghost and went back to printing off supply manifests I'd written policy on 3 fiscal years ago. In meetings, I sat in the corner, clipboard in hand, pen tapping gently like I was too slow to follow the jargon. And then I heard it. Nathan, holding court like he was Moses on a mountaintop, leaned back in his chair and said it loud enough to silence the room. Had to let some dinosaurs go last quarter. Elise Morrow, remember her? Real shame. Thought we'd promote her. Dead weight. Someone chuckled. Another sipped their coffee awkwardly. One woman glanced around like she wasn't sure if it was okay to laugh. My pen paused. I kept my face neutral. Not a twitch. Not a blink. I nodded, wrote the words down, and left the meeting without a word. The second I got back to my desk, I logged into an encrypted relay I'd set up and dropped the transcript to every single board member, anonymously. No signature, no trail, just the cold, ugly truth wrapped in perfect timestamps. Let them hear how the golden boy spoke when he thought no one important was listening. And I was important. I'd spent 14 years turning that company from a logistics mudhole into a functional supply artery. I knew where every dollar leaked. I knew which execs padded reports, which teams siphoned resources for pet projects, and which board members needed to believe they were rescuing something instead of maintaining it. And now I was sitting at the belly of the beast, unrecognizable and unseen, collecting receipts one whisper at a time. The worst moment came later that afternoon. I was alone in the print room, paper tray jammed, toner blinking red like a siren, and my hands started shaking. Not out of fear, rage. I gripped the edge of the table hard enough to leave fingernail dents and whispered under my breath, "Not today, Elise. Not today." I closed my eyes, let the fury wash over me and pass. Because emotion was a luxury. Precision was the goal. There would be no catharsis scream, no cinematic speech, only data, only leverage. And when it landed, it would be permanent. That night, I made 2 lists. List A, names of every executive who laughed at Nathan's joke. List B, names of those who didn't. You learn a lot in silence. And Calburn was practically screaming. There's a peculiar high that comes from watching arrogant men sit on a time bomb and not know it. Every time Nathan strutted through the halls in his tailored suits and half smirked at his reflection, I added another fuse. By the end of week 3, Calburn was a Rube Goldberg machine of liability, and I was the marble quietly rolling toward impact. Indigo Merge, my consulting firm, had already cleared the first 2 review rounds. The proposal I'd written was a scalpel disguised as a solution, full-spectrum automation overhaul, AI-integrated inventory modeling, supplier redundancy charts, and a plan to reduce operational costs by 37% in under 9 months. It made the other bidders look like they were submitting fan fiction. Every claim was backed by simulations I ran off the company's own data. Because, of course, I still had access. No one ever revoked my back-end credentials. Too many systems. Too little oversight. Just the way I liked it. Behind the curtain, I pulled strings so subtly even the board didn't realize their unbiased evaluation panel had quietly placed Indigo Merge at the top. I even arranged a glowing third-party referral from a shell logistics firm I spun up using 2 Fiverr actors and an LLC, I'd registered 5 years ago for unrelated reasons. Sometimes, long games play themselves out if you just wait. But the proposal was only the appetizer. The main course? A 48-page dossier I spent 6 sleepless nights compiling in a document titled Strategic Decay, Calburn's Operational Myopia. In it, I detailed every corner they'd cut, every budget they'd inflated, and every executive expense that should have triggered a compliance audit. There were contracts with ghost vendors, shell companies funneling consulting fees back to a VP's cousin, duplicate invoice patterns that should have been caught by a middle schooler with a spreadsheet, and a strategic roadmap that hadn't been updated since 2017, still referencing a supplier that had gone bankrupt in 2019. Embarrassing, yes. But also damning. I didn't send it from an Indigo merge address. I didn't send it from my old Calburn login. I routed it through 3 encrypted relays and dropped it into every board member's inbox just after 6 a.m. on a Thursday, right as they were checking their email over their protein shakes and overpriced Nespresso pods. Page 47 contained the audit trail of every red flag I had archived over the last 3 years. Page 48 was simple, 1 line, black text on white background. Check the real owner registry, Elise Morrow, majority stakeholder. No signature, no send-off, just silence after the storm. I stared at the line for 10 full minutes before I hit send. My cursor hovered over the period at the end like it was a guillotine. That moment, that inhale between anonymity and consequence, was electric. I didn't know which board member would be the first to connect the dots. Didn't care. I had them. Every one of them. By the throat, with their own signatures and blind spots as the noose. I went back to the ops floor after sending it. Nathan passed me twice that day, still calling me kiddo, still blind. Let him gloat. The clock was ticking. By Monday, Calburn Industries felt like a building 3 seconds before implosion, quiet in all the wrong places. You could feel it in the way people whispered in corners they used to joke in, how the elevators ran a beat slower, like even the machinery was holding its breath. The board had called not 1, but 2 emergency sessions in 72 hours. People talked and people speculated, but no one had answers. Because the answers weren't coming from HR or finance. They were coming from a woman in worn-out flats, pushing a supply cart through the 3rd-floor hallway. Nathan wasn't strutting anymore. He was pacing. Eyes bloodshot, shirt collars a little looser every day, like his confidence had started slipping through the buttonholes. I caught him outside the finance wing one morning, hissing into his phone. I don't care who sent the report. Just find out what they know. That was the first crack. He was sweating through his undershirt before 10 a.m. People noticed. I noticed. And the whispers started. Something's coming. Boards on edge. Did you hear about the vendor audit? They didn't know what, just that the air had changed. I was the temperature shift no one could trace. And I kept feeding it. That Thursday, Nathan asked me to prep the investor packets for the upcoming quarterly review. Normally, that would have gone to someone in admin, but the department was short-staffed after a few strategic firings. Irony's got a wicked sense of humor. I said yes, of course, smiled like I was flattered. The packet was 23 pages long. Financial summaries, market outlooks, future initiatives that would never happen under his leadership. And right between the investor ROI chart and the capital investment breakdown, I slid in one more page, unlabeled, unnumbered. a high-res copy of the deed transfer for the property housing Calburn's HQ. Highlighted name, E. Morrow. Right above the clause that confirmed ownership had transitioned to my trust 8 years ago. The document was real, not a scan, not a mock-up. I'd printed it from the county's own digital vault that morning. I clipped the packets neatly, stapled them in sets of 3, and walked them straight to Nathan's glass-walled office. He barely looked at me when I handed them over. "Thanks, kiddo," he muttered, flipping through one set distractedly. "Leave the rest on the table." I did, but the CFO noticed. I saw it in real time. He picked up a packet at the boardroom entrance, flipped through, paused, his brow folded in like origami. He stepped aside, away from the others, and pulled out his phone, texted someone, then looked around the room like it had grown teeth. I walked back to my desk, calm, composed. My pulse was steady like I'd rehearsed this 100 times in my head. I opened my phone, drafted a message to my lawyer, and typed one word. Ready. Then I turned my phone face down, sipped the terrible break room coffee that tasted like cardboard and regret, and waited. Let them scramble. Let them sweat. Let them feel what 14 years of ignored warnings and overlooked expertise boiled down to. Ownership, not just of the building, of the narrative. Boardroom. 9 a.m. sharp. The room was too bright, the kind of sterile white that makes men like Nathan feel powerful. A long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting, lined with faces that had once skimmed my reports without ever reading them. They sat straighter than usual, shuffling papers that suddenly felt heavier. The chairman cleared his throat and announced, "Indigo Merge's representative is here." Silence. Then I stepped in. No lanyard, no temp badge, no clipboard to clutch like a crutch. Just me. No blazer either, just a black button-down and slacks that meant business without trying to convince anyone. My hair wasn't tied back anymore. I let it down, let it frame my face like armor. I walked to the head of the table and set a single folder in front of the chairman. Calm, controlled, measured. "Elise Morrow," I said, "owner, and now, operator." For a second, no one breathed. Then Nathan stood like someone had just tasered him from below. His voice cracked, beautifully. You were just..." He didn't even finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We all knew what he was about to say. Just a temp. Just a woman. Just a ghost in the corner. I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. Thick paper, gold-trimmed edge, the kind reserved for legal mail that makes grown men sweat. I handed it to him. He hesitated. "Go on," I said. "You'll want to read it." He tore it open like it might bite. Inside, formal notice of termination, with cause, effective immediately. 3 pages outlining breach of ethical conduct, misuse of funds, manipulation of internal hiring procedures, and willful neglect of compliance standards. Every word bulletproof, every claim backed by documents his own hands had signed. He looked up at me like I'd stabbed him. I leaned in slightly, just enough for him to hear, and said evenly, "Security will walk you out. You can leave the stapler." The silence that followed cracked like glass. He didn't move at first, just stood there, stunned, trying to mentally rewind a world that had already changed without his permission. One of the junior board members stood and gestured toward the door. 2 security guards entered a beat later, their expressions blank and professional. Nathan opened his mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to plead, but I didn't let him. I turned to the board. As of today, Calburn Industries will operate under new direction. Indigo Merge has been appointed by majority ownership to restructure, repurpose, and revive all internal systems. Any resistance will be viewed as obstruction. I paused. Questions? No one spoke. A few nodded. One adjusted his tie with trembling fingers. As Nathan shuffled out, I caught his eye one last time. There was no hatred in mine, just clarity. He looked like a man who'd seen a ghost walk through a wall he thought was solid. Because that's what I was now. Not a ghost. A reckoning. The board vote wasn't even close. Unanimous. Not a single dissenting voice. Not even from the ones who once called me overly cautious in performance reviews or forwarded my memos without reading past the subject line. Funny how fear sharpens perspective. They saw what Nathan hadn't. The weight behind the woman they'd written off. Not just strategy, ownership, control, leverage. They saw it all now, in balance sheets, in legal documents, in the absence of anyone left to blame but themselves. I stood at the head of the table, hands steady, posture clean. No gloating, no smirk. Just a calm, calculated breath as I scanned the room of men and women who suddenly remembered my name. You don't lose good people in a day, I said, my voice firm but quiet. You erode them, year by year, dismiss their warnings, bury their solutions under red tape, water down their wins. Then one day, they walk out and take the foundation with them. No one dared interrupt. I spent 14 years holding this place together from the inside. Now I'll rebuild it from the top. Not for revenge, not for applause. Because it should have always been better than what you settled for. One of the newer board members, mid-40s MBA face, probably voted yes just to ride the winning horse, tilted his head and asked, "Why the disguise? Why go through all of this instead of coming straight to us?" I didn't hesitate. Because if I'd walked in the front door, you would have smiled and still ignored me. That landed harder than I expected. A beat passed, then another. You could hear the HVAC system hum and the click of someone's pen dropping onto a legal pad. The weight of the truth settled like dust. Then, from somewhere near the middle of the table, soft at first, came the sound of clapping, followed by another. And then, reluctantly, more. Not a standing ovation, nothing performative, just the slow, awkward recognition of a room full of people realizing they had underestimated the wrong person for far too long. I didn't smile, not even a twitch. Applause wasn't the goal. That kind of validation comes too late to matter. This wasn't about vindication, it was about restoration, of order, of direction, of a standard I had upheld alone while others cashed in on shortcuts. The meeting concluded with new transition protocols. A compliance officer, one I trusted, was brought in within the hour. Financial reviews scheduled. Systems access rotated. Vendor audits initiated. Calburn was entering triage under new hands. My hands. As the board members filtered out, a few offered nods or muttered thanks. I accepted them all the same way, silent, efficient, unchanged. There was no victory dance waiting for me, no champagne cork or confetti moment, just the cold clarity of having said what needed to be said, and being heard. Finally. The building felt different at night. Quieter, yes, but not the silence of abandonment. It was the hum of something resetting, something exhaled after years of holding its breath. I moved through the halls of Calburn Industries slowly, not as a ghost anymore, but as its pulse. The overhead lights buzzed softly, casting long reflections across the polished floors. The same floors I used to sprint across to fix a supplier crisis in 2013. The same ones I used to walk barefoot at midnight when we pulled all-nighters before the East Coast compliance audits. Now they echoed differently under my steps. My name was on the property deeds filed with the county clerk. My terms inked across the new operational guidelines that would govern every department. The new supply AI rollout bore my fingerprint on line 6 of the deployment code, right where I left it in the simulation. This time, nothing would move without my say-so. Not because I wanted control for control's sake, but because for once, the person who gave a damn about structure was finally allowed to design it. The temp badge they'd issued me as E. Hawthorne now sat in a drawer beside my new desk, tucked behind the legal documents, terminating half a dozen bloated vendor contracts. The chair I sat in didn't squeak anymore. The monitors weren't secondhand. It wasn't luxury. It was function. Real order. Earned precision. I passed the break room on my way out for the night. The same one I'd cried in 10 years ago when we missed a supplier bid by a single hour because Nathan overrode my approval. The same room where someone once mocked me for bringing my own coffee creamer in a labeled jar, because only control freaks do that. Tonight, someone had left a mug on the counter, dusty, forgotten, faded from 1,000 dishwasher cycles. White letters still faintly visible against the black ceramic. Team Morrow, Q2 champs. I froze, stared at it like it might disappear if I blinked. That was from a decade ago. 1 quarter where my team shattered fulfillment records, cut delivery lag by 22%, and earned Calburn its first performance bonus in 5 years. They gave us mugs, cheap ones. But I'd kept mine on my desk until the day I was let go. This one must have survived, hidden in some cabinet, untouched, waiting like the company itself, for someone to notice. I rinsed it in the sink, scrubbed it clean. No ceremony, no speech. Then I carried it back to my new office, placed it beside my keyboard, turned off the lights, locked the door. They fired the strategist. They forgot the owner was watching. I didn't come back to burn it down. I came to build, on my own terms.